Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission and the continuation in the hearing in docket number 2022-3-E. It's the case involving Duke Energy Carolina's base rates for fuel cost. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Appearing virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. We are still in Duke Energy Carolina's case, and we have the panel of Mr. Martin and Ms. Clark. And at this juncture, before we begin, is there anything from any of the parties before we get back into cross-examination? Okay. Say CCL and Upstate Forever, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair Belser, and good afternoon, Ms. Clark. I just have questions for you. So in your rebuttal testimony, you described the fuel recovery mechanism and state that DEC customers do not over or underpay for the cost of fuel needed to supply their electricity. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. You would agree, wouldn't you, that if DEC's forecast from prior fuel proceeding exceeds its actual fuel costs over a billing period, that means customers pay more over that period than they would if Duke's forecast was exactly correct.
I would agree.
Okay. That's a bit less money in that customer's pocket every month than they would have if Duke could forecast those costs exactly, right?
I agree.
And those customers won't see that money again until the true up the following year, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And the converse is true too, right? So if DEC's forecast underestimates its fuel costs, that means customers will be paying less over that period than they would if the forecast was exactly correct.
That's correct.
But the result could be, as is the case this year, an unexpected increase in the fuel rider in the following year. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, from Duke's perspective, whether fuel costs go up or down, the fuel cost adjustment mechanism has ensured that the utility is able to, with great precision, recover all of those fuel costs from customers within roughly 2 years of them being incurred. Is that right?
Normally 12 months, yes.
So within 1 year of them being incurred. Mm-hmm. So from the company's perspective, that makes accounting related to fuel costs pretty predictable, right?
In normal markets, but we are in volatile times.
But again, under the fuel cost adjustment mechanism, whether costs are volatile or not, the company expects to be able to recover those costs through that mechanism in these fuel proceedings, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And isn't it true that, in fact, in these proceedings, the company often just kind of updates the dates and numbers in much of its testimony and exhibits from the prior year?
Just kind of updates. I would say that we actually have a lengthy process that goes into updating rates.
But my question is specifically about your testimony and exhibits in these proceedings.
Yes, I would say that's correct.
So is it safe to say that for the company, these proceedings are relatively routine and the accounting mechanisms and adjustments that have to be made are fairly routine for the company?
I would say that's correct.
Okay. So witness Verderami testified earlier, and in his testimony, it states fuel costs are volatile, and there are a lot of different factors that affect them. They're quite complicated. You would agree, wouldn't you, that given how complicated fuel markets and the fuel recovery mechanisms are, that the average DEC customer is unlikely to understand how the mechanism works or what fuel markets are doing, right?
I would agree with that. There is a deterministic model that goes into the projections that creates the rates that we ask for.
And so you'd also agree then that it would be really difficult or impossible for customers to know how to plan or budget for these potential ups or downs.
As a company, we do have resources available for customers to plan. We have budget billing, certain resources that are available on our website.
Okay. But for the vast majority of customers, those options are not available. Is that correct?
I would say they're available for all customers.
Okay. So fuel costs, they represent one of, if not the largest portion of customers' energy bills. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you'd agree the company has limited ability to control the fuel costs that it pays, right?
I would not say limited ability. I mean, we do dispatch our resources depending on the lowest cost for customers.
Right. But the company pays the price for these fuels that is available on the market, right?
That is correct. We do have hedging strategies, other strategies that help mitigate the risk to customers, though.
Okay. And so the largest portion of customers' bills then is dependent on market conditions that the company has limited ability to control. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
Okay. So Duke doesn't earn a profit on its fuel costs. I know your testimony says that, but you would agree that Duke does earn a profit on the gas plants that it owns that burn the fuel. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Are you aware that in some states, commissions have found that it's reasonable to expose utilities to a portion of these fuel cost risks by requiring that utilities bear a portion of any higher fuel costs that they incur?
I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Clark. That's all of my questions.
Thank you. ORS?
Good afternoon, Mr. Martin. I have a few questions for you. On page 9 of your direct testimony, you talk about the values of NEM, DER, and that transmission and distribution component is 0. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would you agree that Duke's methodology for developing the NEM, DER values in this proceeding was just, reasonable, and in the public interest?
Yes, I would.
And Duke would only propose a non-zero number or value if it was just, reasonable, and in the public interest as well.
That's correct.
In your testimony, you discussed the stipulation between DEC and SACE and CCL that was filed in dockets number 2022 1E and 2022 3E. Is that correct?
Yes.
Madam Chair Belzer, I move that the stipulation entered into by DEC, SACE, and CCL filed with this commission on May 25th, 2022 be entered in the record as the next hearing of exhibit.
Any objection?
No objection.
Other parties, any objection? Okay. 8. Ms. Rainey, what's the date of that stipulation again, please?
May 25th, 2022.
This. Okay. The stipulation dated May 25th, 2022, entered into docket 2022-1-E and on the DMS in 2022-3-E is marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 8 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Thomas.
the one that I just received on the front page says May 19th, 2022.
That's the date on the stipulation, but on the DMS,
It was filed on the 25th.
correct.
Is that correct?
Yes. That's
Okay, that was filed on May 25th. But this is a stipulation that was addressing the transmission and distribution cost in the NEM calculation. Is that correct? Okay. I think we've identified it appropriately. So it's hearing exhibit number 8.
Okay, thank you. In the stipulation, DEC and SACE and CCL agreed that they would work in good faith to reach an agreement about the reasonable and underlying assumptions.
Ms. Rainey, can I get you to speak into that microphone a little bit more?
Sure.
It's-
Okay. You want a question over?
If you don't mind, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay. In the stipulation, can you hear me better?
Yes.
In the stipulation, DEC and SACE and CCL agreed that they would work in good faith to reach agreements about the underlying, about reasonable underlying assumptions and methodologies for developing the transmission and distribution component. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So at this time, you don't know what those assumptions will be. Is that correct?
That's correct. I do not.
And you don't know what methodology will be used yet. Is that correct?
No, that hasn't been determined yet.
So the T&D component value could still be 0.
That is correct.
And would you agree DEC would only propose a non-zero value for T&D if it is just reasonable and in the public's interest?
That's correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rainey. Commissioners, questions for this panel? Commissioner Caston.
Good afternoon, Mr. Martin.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You ever feel like you're drowning in a sea of paper?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Martin,
Yes, sir.
in your testimony, you discussed the NEM incentive. Excuse me. And there've been some discussion in recent cases, around this incentive and its impact on cost. On page 5 of your direct testimony, yes, page 5. Which cost types on that page 5 of your direct testimony are affected by the NEM incentive?
The primary one is the DERP NEM incentive component, the item 2,
Two.
line item 2. The other components would be the NEM meter costs that are associated with that, but they're not directly part of the incentive. They are covered by the DERP charges.
And which one's that again?
From the bolded item that says total DERP incremental cost, if you go up 3 lines, the NEM meter costs.
Okay.
Those would be the primary direct ones for the NEM customers.
Yeah. Small print. So if the value of the NEM
Yes.
that energy metering increased, is it reasonable to conclude that the DERP NEM incentive cost bucket would go down?
If the value of the
If the value of the NIM increased,
The net energy metering. So are you referring to the credit the customer generator receives?
yes.
Okay, yes, sir. If that were to increase, then the DIRT NEM incentive could potentially increase as well. The incentive is based upon that credit received by the customer generator and the value of solar determined through the other calculation. So that difference is there. If that value of solar would remain as it is today and the NEM or the value to the customer generator goes up, then that NEM incentive would increase.
Okay. And if the value of the NIM did increase, would other fuel billing factors be affected at all?
I'm not aware of others that would be affected by that.
So if no other fuel billing factors would be affected, would an increased value of NIM result in a cost shift elsewhere that could affect the customer bill now or in the future?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. Ms. Clark, I just can't think of anything right now. But thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners?
Chair Belzer,
Commissioner Williams?
thank you. Thank you for being here. Ms. Clark, I have one question, and it has to do with the estimated use by energy household at 1,000 kilowatts. Is that reevaluated from time to time? Is that, that's a standard that's been used for a while? Is it, as we're using more energy, has it changed? As we're becoming more energy efficient, has it changed?
It's my understanding that this isn't just an industry held practice where we use 1,000 kilowatt hours per household. I understand what you're saying. The average household probably has increased at this time, but for right now, we are still using the industry standard.
And do you know how long we've used the industry standard?
I do not. I do not. off the top
Okay.
of my head.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Martin, I want to follow up on the questions that Commissioner Caston asked about the NEM incentive.
Yes, ma'am.
That is projected to go out until 2029, maybe? Does that sound right?
Yes, as far as the participant benefits, correct.
Okay. And how is that cost recovered? Is that a factor that it goes for those participants that are receiving that incentive? How is those costs recovered?
They're recovered through the DIRT recovery methodology that we're discussing here in the fuel proceeding, where those costs are put into the calculation and then generated for a component into the fuel factor.
So those incentives are spread out over all ratepayers, regardless of class.
That's correct.
Okay. And those benefits, some of those are going to extend until somewhere around 2029. Is it anticipated that those costs will be fully recovered by that time, or is there a different date when that incentive cost will be fully recovered?
It would be a different time. We'll obviously incur costs through effectively May of 2029 for those participating customers that have that timeline. Depending upon how the account for DIRT recovery is set at that point and the recovery methodology that we have, it will be some years period of time past that before it's fully recovered.
And that DIRT methodology part is recovered in the fuel cost, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then what, is there surcharges that are that's added every, is that?
That's
the
correct.
Full
Each-
recovery?
Each customer pays the amounts that Witness Clark articulated for the dirt charges.
Okay. So it's two-pronged,
Yes,
part in the fuel cost, or the
correct,
base rate for fuel cost,
correct,
and then part by the
dirt
surcharge that's
charge.
capped by statute.
correct.
And at this point, only the industrials have reached their cap of $100.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Ms. Clark, they identified you as a person that could talk about the settlement agreement.
Yes.
Okay. Why is that settlement agreement in the public interest?
I would say that looking at the fuel statute, it is our duty to bring costs incurred for the period to be recovered through the succeeding 12 months. But we are in unprecedented times. The company understands that this is a big ask at this point. And so in order to find a balance between company recovery, mitigating costs to customers, but still looking at what the fuel statute requires of us, we felt like spreading it 24 months would help lessen the impact to the customer.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit, or have you answer some questions for me about the forecast used. I believe you addressed this in your direct testimony. In last year's proceeding, my recollection is that shortly before the hearing, DEC had to update its testimony because of the volatility of gas prices had increased the forecast significantly. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
And so as a result of that proceeding, I believe one of the parties had requested that the commission required Duke or DEC to conduct forecasts closer to the time of their pre-file testimony. I believe the order required 30 days. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And DEC was unable to meet that 30-day forecast in this proceeding. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Just briefly tell me why.
Yeah, absolutely. After last year's fuel proceeding, we understand the order was to commit to a 30-day-old forecast for the rates that we were asking for in the fuel proceeding. We really went back, talked to our fuels analytics group to see what we could do without increasing additional resources, and we were able to utilize a mid-month run in order to lock in prices and have a forecast that would be able to be put in front of you all in a timely manner to comply with our filing.
Okay. But the order required 30.
That's correct.
Okay. Is 30 days an impossibility for Duke to meet?
After going through it, this is my first time going through it, I can elaborate a little bit more on the process if you'd like.
That'd be fine.
Yep. So we lock in prices under our fuels and analytics group, and it really takes them 2 full weeks to run this model that they have that takes into account weather, customer demand, outages, all these outliers, 2 full weeks. Then they hand that information over to me, and it is not plug and play. I have to dissect the information to make sure that it's in a manner that I can present to South Carolina, and that takes me a full 2 weeks. The additional week that we used was just building testimony, vetting out the numbers that we saw, communicating that, working on what the impacts to our customers would be, and so forth.
Okay. So, I mean, in your opinion, is 30 days an impossible ask?
I would say yes.
Okay. And I understand from ORS's testimony that they did not object to the 45 days. Is that correct?
I agree. Yes.
Are you aware of any other party raising a concern over the 45 days prior to pre-file testimony?
No, I am not.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think I saw another light down there. Or did I? Commissioner Thomas?
You took care of my questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions of this panel? Any redirect, Mr. Trawick?
Very briefly.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Clark, has any party proposed a disallowance in this proceeding?
No.
And does the company have a vested interest in reducing costs for customers as evidenced in the testimony and exhibits offered by the company in this case?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect based on limited recross? Excuse me, any recross based on limited redirect? I think I said that backward. Energy users, say CCL, Upstate Forever, ORS, commissioners. Thank you all for your testimony today. You may stand down.
And Madam Chair, I'd ask that the witnesses be excused.
At your peril.
With the right to recall Ms. Clark.
Well, then, is she going to be excused or stand down? Okay. They're excused.
Thank you.
Anything else from the company at this time?
Nothing further, Madam Chair.
Okay. Interveners, have y'all decided, are y'all going to switch order? That's fine, I'm just,
Yes, we're ready to proceed with Mr. Benz.
is that,
I wasn't sure what the order was after Duke, but if they can go with Vince, I think Mr. O'Donnell is on standby.
okay. Say CCL, please call your witness. We didn't give them a cast of characters? Y'all don't normally give one to the final?
Thank you, Chair Bowser. The South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and Upstate Forever would like to call Ronald J. Benz to the stand.
I believe Mr. Benz is virtual, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Just bear with me. Good afternoon, Mr. Benz.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Benz, I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand and I'll administer the oath to swear you in. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. You may put your hand down. And
Mr. Benz, please state your name for the record.
I know what the question is, but I can't quite hear it, so let me try this again. I'll turn up your volume. My name is Ronald J. Benz.
And can you hear me now, Mr. Benz?
Very weak.
Do we need to take a
just
moment?
bear with me a minute. We're going to see if we have a wireless microphone that we can pin to your lapel. How about that?
Sounds great. Mr. Benz, can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay, I'll speak up. But don't hesitate to let me know if you can't hear something I said. Now, Mr. Benz, would you please introduce yourself to the commission?
Sure. Good afternoon, Chairman Belser and members of the commission. My name is Ron Benz, and I'm a principal with Public Policy Consulting. That's a firm specializing in energy policy and regulatory matters. I provide regulatory consulting services to public sector and private sector clients in energy and telecommunication.
And Mr. Binns, please describe your experience working in energy policy and utility regulation.
Well, I have been involved in energy policy and regulation since 1979. I've held a variety of positions over that time. My focus primarily has been on protecting consumer interests and improving regulation, including 12 years as the first director of the Colorado Office of Consumer Counsel and as the chairman of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission from 2007 to 2011. Since leaving the Colorado PUC, my work has largely focused on the related topics of the new utility business model and a new regulatory model. My work seeks to enable utility business innovation as the utility sector reacts to major structural and technological changes and the need to mitigate the upward rate pressure due to the replacement of aging grid infrastructure in the coming decades.
And please describe your experience as a testifying witness.
I have extensive experience as a testifying witness, and I've been involved in more than 300 regulatory proceedings before federal and state agencies, including 20 state regulatory commissions, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FCC, federal courts of appeals, state and federal district courts, and the U.S. Supreme Court. I've also testified before the U.S. House and Senate committees 16 times.
And have you ever testified before a state commission on the issues you address in this proceeding?
Yes, as a recent example, which is mentioned in my resume attached to the testimony, I testified in 3 fuel cost proceedings for subsidiaries of the Hawaiian electric companies before the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. Similar to the practice here under Hawaii's fuel cost mechanism, the utility was historically able to pass through 100% of its fuel cost changes to customers, shielding the utility from the volatility in the market for fuel oil in Hawaii's case. In response to my testimony on fuel cost risks and the detrimental incentives provided by a 100% pass-through, the Hawaii PUC made an adjustment to the cost recovery mechanism that splits the fuel volatility 98% and 2% between ratepayers and the HECO companies.
And Mr. Binns, please describe your experience as chairman with the Colorado PUC, or Public Utilities Commission.
During my time as chairman, I rewrote the Colorado PUC's IRP rules, worked to improve commission operations, and presided over of important new Colorado law called the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act. I also presided over several fuel proceedings such as this one, as well as cases involving energy efficiency and the acquisition of renewable resources. As chairman, I dealt with many of the same issues facing the South Carolina Commission here, and I'd like to think that I can offer the Commission some insights as a former colleague.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I would ask that Mr. Binns be qualified as an expert in energy policy and utility regulation, including fuel cost adjustment mechanisms.
Just a second. Objection or any voir dire for the witness regarding his qualifications? Company?
No objection.
SCEC? ORS? Thank you. Mr. Binns will be recognized and accepted as an expert in the field of energy policy and utility regulation, including fuel cost adjustment mechanisms.
And Mr. Binns, did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on August 26th, 2022, direct testimony consisting of 38 pages?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any additional changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony at this time?
I do not.
Mr. Binns, if the questions put to you in your, excuse me, Mr. Binns, did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket on September 8th, corrected direct testimony consisting of 38 pages?
Yes, I did. There were some minor, essentially typographical changes.
And Mr. Binns, if the questions put to you in your corrected testimony were asked at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I would move to have Mr. Binns' pre-filed corrected direct testimony entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Binns's corrected pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
And Mr. Binns, did you also attach to your direct and corrected direct testimony 2 exhibits identified as exhibits RJB1 and RJB2?
Yes, I did.
Were the exhibits to your direct and corrected direct testimony prepared by you or under your direction?
Yes.
I would also move to have exhibits RJB1 and RJB2 as attached to Mr. Binns' pre-filed direct and corrected direct testimony entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Binns's exhibits RJB1 and RJB2 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 9 and entered into the record of this proceeding.
And Chair Belzer, at this time we would request to present Mr. Binns' summary of his direct testimony in Q&A format. I would also request to share 3 visuals to go along with his summary, if that's acceptable.
Yes, ma'am, please proceed. I do want, may I ask clarification?
Yes, of course.
We are just putting in the corrected direct exhibit, the corrected pre-filed and the exhibits
Correct.
attached. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Binns, please explain the purpose of your testimony in this proceeding.
My testimony has 3 purposes. First, to provide an overview of the factors driving DEC's fuel rider increase, particularly fuel cost volatility and the price increases of fuel. Second, to explain how the utility business model creates a moral hazard by shielding utilities like Duke from the impacts of fuel price fluctuations while shifting all of that risk to customers. And third, to provide the Commission with what I call a risk-aware framework for evaluating risk in DEC's annual fuel proceedings and in interrelated dockets. By recognizing how this moral hazard factors into past, current, and future Commission proceedings involving Duke Energy, the Commission can protect ratepayers from future unprecedented increases like the ones being currently proposed. As the Commission is well aware, Duke's proposed fuel cost adjustment in this case will raise residential consumer bills by 13.2%. This increase is larger than the rate increases approved in DEC's 2 most recent rate cases and 4.7 percentage points higher than the June 22 inflation rate, which has drawn considerable sharp complaints from the public. While Duke's proposed increase is unprecedented, it is a predictable and predicted outcome of gas price volatility.
Mr. Binns, what is meant by a moral hazard, quote unquote?
In finance and economics, moral hazard is a situation where one party can engage in risky behavior or fail to act in good faith because it knows the other party bears the economic consequences of their behavior.
And Mr. Binns, what is driving recent increases in gas prices?
Before addressing the recent increases, it's important to understand the concept of volatility. For commodities like gas or coal, volatility describes how quickly the price of the commodity changes over time. Because volatility measures the speed of price changes both up and down, it doesn't necessarily mean that prices are increasing. Figures 1 and 2 in my testimony show that after a period of relatively stable gas prices and low volatility from 2011 to 2020, the price of gas is now both volatile and increasing and has achieved price levels not seen in the last 15 years. Figure 1 on my page 11 of my testimony shows the recent history of gas prices.
And I've placed, perfect.
As you can see, as I just said, that the current upswing in gas prices really can be compared to the prices back in the range of 2008. I remember very well the price that peaked on July 3rd, 2008. We were warning customers about coming higher bills during the winter when suddenly the price began to head downward. The next figure two is the volatility of prices. Now, just to note the difference, volatility means how quickly the prices change. And you'll see that the calculated price volatility, not the prices over the same period, you can see that the prices are increasingly volatile. And because gas prices are inherently volatile, it is difficult to attribute recent price increases to a single cause. On balance, it is a primary result of supply and demand pressures. The U.S. economy has snapped back following the economic turndown caused by COVID-19, which has spurred new demand. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has also added pressure to international gas prices because Europe is moving away from Russian natural gas supply. And finally, inflation is a worldwide phenomenon and affects all industries. Gas production and transportation are no different.
And is a lack of pipeline infrastructure driving the recent increases in gas prices?
No, I disagree with witness Veradami on that point. The current debates about the need for pipelines in the Southeast are mainly driven by a question of how much pipeline capacity is needed for future gas deliveries, not as a tool to lower gas prices. Domestic supplies are increasingly connected to the global market and are tied to the global commodity price. But more importantly, completion of the interstate pipeline infrastructure or not is outside this commission's and this utility's control, and is not a solution the commission can pursue for the problems that customers are facing at this proceeding. To the extent that future pipeline capacity and its impact on prices is highly uncertain, it makes the utility's plans to build a new generation of gas plants even more concerning. Other than reducing their reliance on fossil fuel-based resources, utilities and the commission have limited ability to protect customers from commodity price risk.
And does reliance on coal expose customers to similar price risks?
Yes, both coal and gas are commodities that can expose customers to price volatility. For many years, the spot market in thermal coal was relatively big, but as of the date of my testimony, coal prices were at record highs. Figure 3, which I think you will put up, it's on page 15 of my testimony. It tracks the spot prices of coals in the 3 mining regions where Duke purchases coal. And as you can see, in the last year and a half, basically, or 2 years, the price has escalated very rapidly.
And in South Carolina, how do utilities recover the fuel costs they incur?
South Carolina employs a fuel cost adjustment mechanism. I'll call those FCAs. FCAs are common today, but they only emerged following the 1973 Arab oil embargo. which caused market prices for generation fuels to become much more volatile. At the time, fuel costs were included in base rates. Because of rapidly increasing and volatile fuel prices, many utilities were forced to file what were known as pancaked rate cases, with new cases being filed before the pending ones were settled. FCAs help lighten the regulatory load by lessening the need for frequent rate cases. Unsurprisingly, consumer advocates opposed FCAs, arguing that the FCAs relieved much of the pressure on the utilities to be efficient and shifted all fuel cost risk to customers. Indeed, the emergence of FCAs has removed the main pressure on utilities to become and remain efficient as business firms, pressure from cost changes. For that reason, while FCAs are still common, a handful of states, including, as I mentioned, Hawaii, have FCAs in which utilities collect less than 100% of the variation up and down in fuel prices, exposing the utilities to a portion of the volatility of the prices associated with the fuel they burn, so that they have some skin in the game. And that expression was used by the Hawaii Commission to explain their logic in adopting that change.
And how do fuel cost adjustment proceedings obscure the risks that reliance on gas-fired generation poses to ratepayers?
The FCA mechanism makes reliance on gas resources appear, from Duke Energy's perspective, to be less risky than they actually are. The risk will not impact Duke because the fuel adjustment mechanism will efficiently compensate Duke for all its prudent gas purchases, no matter how much the price fluctuates or how much it increases. All of the risk of changing prices is transferred to consumers.
In DEC's press release announcing the proposed rate increase in this proceeding, the company highlighted that it does not earn a profit on the fuel costs it incurs. How do you evaluate that statement?
The statement is technically true, but it can also be misleading. Electric utilities may not make a profit on the fuel they purchase, but they do make a profit on power plants that burn that fuel. Under cost of service regulation, the company's profit margin is calculated as a rate of return multiplied times the rate base. Thus, adding a power plant to rate base is a primary way that the utilities can grow and increase their earnings. It's well understood that this creates a capital expenditure bias, or as it's known, CapEx bias, that can lead utilities to invest in hard assets when others, such as demand response, energy efficiency, and purchase power, might be lower cost to customers. An FCA thus plays a role in the utility's preference to grow its rate base. From a utility's perspective, a natural gas plant is an ideal investment. It builds the rate base and is not risky because fuel costs are passed on to customers. As a simple analogy in my testimony, I use the example of a car salesman. He or she wants to earn a higher commission, the return, and is more likely to push buyers towards more expensive cars. If a car buyer is choosing between an expensive gas guzzler and a less expensive fuel efficient car, that would be like energy efficiency or renewables, the salesman is motivated to try and sell the former because the buyer has to pay for the gas. If the car salesman had to pay for any of the gas needed to run the car he sells, his motivation might instead be to sell cars that cost less to operate over time and are thus less susceptible to risks associated with gas prices. The certainty of fuel cost recovery in combination with the CapEx bias creates this moral hazard that induces utilities to invest in fossil fuel generation even when other solutions like renewables, energy efficiency, demand response, or even purchase power may be deployed at lower cost without compromising any reliability of the system.
And how do you recommend the Commission protect customers from future fuel-driven increases such as the one proposed in this proceeding?
First, the commission cannot view these fuel proceedings in a silo. The fuel risks that customers are exposed to here and the resulting rate increases when those risks inevitably come to bear are the result of multiple decisions made in a variety of different dockets, including IRPs, energy efficiency proceedings, rate cases, avoided cost dockets, and many others. To illustrate, consider that in its most recent IRP proceeding, Duke Energy's three primary portfolios included substantial amounts of new natural gas generation. But doubling down on gas additions in future resource planning proceedings will expose ratepayers to the same risk of rate shock they are facing in this proceeding. In contrast, a resource like solar plus storage provides a hedge against fuel price increases and is increasingly cost effective, particularly with the passage of the Federal Inflation Reduction Act and the potential implementation of competitive procurement of energy, renewable energy in South Carolina. These are examples of tools of the Commission's and the utilities' disposal to protect customers from future increases in fuel cost variability.
Thank you. Now, last question. Have you provided resources to assist the Commission as it grapples with the many future resource decisions it faces?
Yes, the second exhibit to my direct testimony is a report on which I was a co-author called Practicing Risk-Aware Regulation, What Every State Regulator Needs to Know. The report was well received by the regulators I know, including those on the South Carolina Commission back in the years in which I wrote this report. It offers 7 strategies for regulators to minimize customer risk. Of the 7, I would recommend 2 and highlight them. First, utilizing robust planning processes and operating in active mode, meaning that the Commission should use its broad authority to take the initiative, be proactive, and not defer excessively to the regulated companies, especially on the big picture issues. Of course, utilities need to run their businesses, but they are regulated businesses, and it is the regulator's role to serve consumer interests by recognizing and reducing risk.
Thank you, Mr. Benz. Chair Belzer, the witness is now available for cross-examination and questions from the Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Clancy. Cross-examination, energy users? Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions.
Duke Energy?
No questions.
Commissioners? Commissioner Justin Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, sir. How are you doing today?
Good afternoon, Commissioner Williams. It's very nice to see you.
Yes, sir. Same here. And I must say you have a very distinguished mustache.
This isn't bad.
I appreciate your testimony here today, sir. I want to be sort of transparent with you here. You do realize if this commission tries to implement or legislate law or create law or policy from the bench, we won't be a commissioner long in South Carolina. I'm not really sure what the rules are in Colorado, but I mean, you do realize we're under a different framework.
Sorry.
No, just ask. I appreciate the testimony, but you do realize that we're under a different regulatory framework.
Well, yes, I've read your law, and I knew commissioners in the past and consumer advocates in the past who worked in South Carolina on these issues. I'm not suggesting the commission go beyond its legislative authority. No commission should do that. But there are ways of implementing your decisions, and I'll just use one example, and that's the integrated resource plan. That turned out to be the place in Colorado where all the very important decisions got made. And we accomplished that by requiring the utilities to really do extensive modeling and to bring into the modeling resources that they might not otherwise have examined. So I think that's an area in which your commission can probably take some initiative. You were authorized to do IRPs. And I think if you make it as robust as possible, you'll begin to see what some of the changes in supply prices are coming out to be.
Yes, sir. Understood, and thank you for sharing that with us. In regards to the case before us today, though, how do you see the options before us, based on your review of the filings?
I think I said in my direct testimony that the horse is out of the barn. By the time the fuel is paid for and burned, there's really not much to do except to look at rate structures and maybe the speed of implementation. You're being offered a stipulation in this case which would spread the very substantial increase out over 2 years. That's an option you have here. The point of my testimony really is that this fuel proceeding is the caboose on a long process that's happened before this. There were decisions made about which kind of plants to build and which kind to dispatch on what basis. And it's those decisions that bring this case to you. You're going to have a lot more of those decisions in the coming decades as the utility begins to reduce its carbon emissions. And I'm concerned that unless the commission takes a laboring oar in this process, the utility may get the wrong idea and bring you right back to this point again in 1 or 2 or 3 years.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the stipulation that was entered into by the company and the energy users, and is also in the record. Have you had opportunity to review that stipulation?
I did very briefly. I'm not going to speak for my client, the SELC or SACE or the other interveners. I would make a couple observations about it, which may be helpful. First, the reduction in the per unit rate across all 3 rate classes is about 10%. So it's a modest change in what will be approved in today's. The only other thing is you're betting a little bit on the come. You don't know what is going to be going on a year from now with gas prices, whether the company has correctly identified them or forecast them for the coming year. And you might be in the future year also looking at a make up or catch up provision for the current year. And then you'll be adding the deferred amount to that. So arithmetically, it all works out. The company is going to get its fuel costs back with interest. Customers are going to pay more because of the interest, but that's because it's delayed in time. So it shouldn't make a lot of difference in arithmetic wise for customers, but it would reduce somewhat by, like I said, about 10% the increase, not points, but 10% of the increase in this year.
All right. Well, I appreciate your testimony, sir. I will say, considering the fact that you've been qualified as an expert based on your knowledge, training, and experience, and I will say you have an impressive resume. Your qualifications as an expert, for me, mean that you have knowledge and information that will help me better understand the issues presented before us today and ultimately help the commission reach a decision considering how much weight we give your testimony. So I'm very interested in your expert opinion regarding the stipulation. I know you can't speak for your clients, but I really just want you to speak for yourself as an expert regarding your thoughts about the stipulation, whether it's fair, reasonable, or if you can't make that determination, is there anything that concerns you about it?
Oh, Commissioner Williams, I haven't checked in with my clients. Let me put myself back in the role of a commissioner in Colorado. If this were presented to me and I saw the very steep increase that's slated for the current year, I would lean towards approving the stipulation. As I said, there's no real difference in the total dollar amount. The only difference being the interest, but then that is supposed to pay for the carrying cost of the deferred amount. I also would consider, if I were you, the likelihood that the new year estimate of gas costs will be somewhere in the ballpark of what actually happens. Otherwise, you're just pushing down the road this lump of an increase. But to answer your question directly, I would be inclined to support it.
Sir, thank you for your testimony and appearing before us virtually today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Madam Chair, no further questions from me.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Commissioner Cast, let's go to Vice Chair Powers. Let's see him.
Thank you. I too appreciate your expert testimony and the use of the term moral hazard. We've had testimony earlier, particularly by the Duke witnesses, that they are acting in the public interest. Your remark that the earlier cases that the fuel costs were underpriced or undervalued, do you consider that a bad business practice or not in the best interest of the public?
Well, I'm an economist, and I think prices should match costs to the degree that you can. They missed on their forecast. I don't know why. I mean, gas prices are very volatile, so I'm not necessarily blaming Duke for a bad forecast. But it turned out that during the base year here, not the billing year, but the year being examined, the rates customers were paying fell quite a bit short of their cost of service in that year. And because of the ability to make it up, when you push that under collection onto the next year, even if your base estimate of gas costs for the new year is correct, customers won't know the difference. They're going to be paying a composite rate, which is the new gas costs plus the unrecovered gas costs from the previous year. It's not a good practice. I mean, it's a tough one for regulators. As I told you, there didn't used to be fuel clauses. The companies put their fuel in rate base, or in base rates, I should say, and there really weren't any catch-up provisions. Sometimes they made money on their estimate, sometimes they lost money on their estimate. But after the oil embargo, it got a lot hairier to guess what the price was going to be, and so the utilities lobbied for and got these fuel cost adjustments. And they've worked moderately well for a long time, but as more competition is coming into the supply side, it exposes what I am calling a moral hazard, because it makes sense from Duke's perspective to build a gas plant, but it might make sense from the societal perspective to put in a big chunk of solar plus storage. The cost of that has fallen dramatically. I'll give you an example. The state of Georgia Power is using $25 a megawatt hour for the estimated cost of solar. If you add $6 to $10 a megawatt hour for storage costs, you get a dispatchable plant, a solar plant with storage. It's going to be cheaper than today's gas plants and today's coal plants. I can't promise you the price of gas won't go way down again, but allowing the sort of usual bit of analysis that the utilities who have a stake in what you decide on what kind of plants go up. I mentioned in my testimony, if I may continue, that Xcel Energy in Colorado embarked on what they call steel for fuel. They noted that a whole lot of their revenues were going out the door to coal suppliers and gas suppliers around the West. And they figured out that if they owned wind and solar in their rate base, they would earn a return on the investment. And they wouldn't have all of these dollars going back and forth for the cost of fuel. They've implemented that over the last 4 or 5 years with very good results for their earnings. And I don't know if I should have to say this, but a system which is just as reliable as it was before they started this.
Okay, but you say that being where we are today, you would accept the stipulation.
Yes, sir.
Do you have some alternative or advice for us? Any other way to handle it?
In this case, this stipulation, I'll say it again, you've got to balance out the benefit of discounting the per kilowatt hour rate by 10%, which is what it will do. Let's see if I've got this right. The gas costs will be lowered by that amount. Let me try this one more time. The electricity costs will be reduced by 10% for the fuel portion of the bill. And then that gets layered on later. You have to decide whether you're on a treadmill here with underestimates continuing, in which case you're not doing any favor to the customers a year and a half from now. But given that this was the largest, I'll call it mistake, but what I mean is the largest misestimation of gas costs. I'm not saying it's Duke's fault. I'm just saying it's the largest one to date. Maybe you want to relieve a little bit of that and hope that in the future 2 cases you'll come out okay. And again, as I said, I'll say this one more time, but please cut me off if you want to. I think the commission should remember what is going through here when it comes to the next IRP and make sure you factor in the possibility of fuel cost shock by customers.
So Duke had no way to control any of this. And, when I hear the word moral, I also hear the word immoral. There's nothing they did wrong. It's just we are where we are.
Well, again, moral hazard, actually, it's used in insurance too, very commonly used in insurance. The concept there being someone who has complete insurance coverage may not be as careful as he would be if he faced the full cost himself. Well, that's exactly the analogy here. A utility which does not have any consequence for volatility and increasing prices in gas markets, they face no consequence for that. They're going to make decisions like building more gas plants, which are possible only if really the customers pick up that risk. Another way to think about it is if Duke had to live with its estimate of fuel prices, do you think they'd build as many gas plants? Probably not.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Powers.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Caston.
Good afternoon, Mr. Benz,
Good afternoon, Commissioner Caston.
and thank you for appearing before us today, and thank you for your service on the Colorado Public Service Commission.
Commissioner, if I could do a voir dire on you, I see you were affiliated with AWWA. Were you
I
a
was.
board member? Did you come to Denver for meetings?
Well, I actually spent a lot of time in Denver, Colorado area. Quincy Boulevard, I think, is
Yep, I know where it is. I know where the building is.
that's where their office is. And I must be honest with you, I see you're located in Denver. I actually preferred Colorado Springs and Estes Park and those areas, but I did spend a lot of time. Beautiful state. Have you spent much time in South Carolina?
A little. I've been there a few times, 2 or 3 times over the years.
I remember.
This is actually my second appearance before this commission. I was in hearings on the very large case involving the financing of the Crystal River plant and the, have I got the right one? No, the VC Summer plant. And also I was involved in the acquisition by Dominion.
Well, I can honestly tell you, South Carolina is much more enjoyable when you're here than virtual. But when you get a chance, come see it. You're going to like it a lot.
I'd be glad to.
But thinking about that, the times I was on Pikes Peak and a lot of the, Estes Park, you go up on a lot of the mountains, and I was in shorts and T-shirt in August, and it was like 30 degrees, I think. I didn't plan that very well. That said, I was told that, it's not unusual at all to get winds in excess of 100 miles an hour on those mountains. And I don't know if that includes the valleys or not. Is that pretty accurate?
Well, there's been plenty of recordings above 100 miles per hour. We have an office of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Boulder, and they have measuring devices. There's just kind of a tunnel almost out of the mountains through across the plains, and yes, they go up very, very high. We also get big swings in temperature. Last week it hit 100 in Denver, and we had our swamp cooler on, but today the heat kicked in. And it's set at 65 degrees in the house. So
I was there when I was sweating, and then it snowed the next day. So
yes,
I understand it. In the high plains, you get some pretty good winds too. And I guess what I was thinking as I was listening to the discussion. Now we, in South Carolina, we have had winds in excess of 100 miles an hour, but they usually had names attached to the storms, and they last about a day and a few months to clean up after it. So I guess as I was listening to the conversation, I was thinking, one, how much I really like Colorado, but the distinct differences in the climates, the how things work, whether it be solar, wind, or whatever. Of course, I suspect if you put a wind turbine on Pikes Peak, you might get just a tad of pushback on that. I'm not sure. But you'd probably get some pretty good winds. But you would agree, though, that there is a distinct difference between South Carolina and Colorado, not talking about the politics or anything like that, but just in the climate in general.
Sure, of course. I studied renewable energy resources around the country, and I know that most of the Southeast has very poor onshore wind resources. That's something we make great use of in Colorado. We have wind farms in Colorado with 50% annual capacity factors. And that kind of capacity factor can displace fuel at a gas plant. We have gas plants which are built for capacity and they don't burn any gas because the energy that is supplied by the wind farms steps in and provides the energy the system needs. You won't have that onshore, but you probably will have it offshore, and I know there's a lot of to and fro ahead on that question. But on solar, you're in pretty good shape. You actually have better solar resources than Georgia, and Georgia's building a lot of solar. And as I mentioned to Commissioner Williams, or perhaps it was Commissioner Powers, that the cost of solar in Georgia is estimated to be 25 cents a megawatt hour, $25 per megawatt hour. That's to be expected in South Carolina, as far as I'm concerned. And one way you get to those prices is doing competitive bidding. I know you're looking at that. And it's been hugely successful in Colorado. Xcel Energy often gets 50 times as much offered as they want to buy. And the prices are rock bottom. I can't prove to you that that would happen in South Carolina, but my very strong suspicion is that you would see solar prices lower than you might imagine. And if that's supplemented by storage, I think you would have a very reliable, dispatchable resource. I'm not working for the solar industry. I'm working for commissions and groups that want to see clean energy come in. And you have a great resource in South Carolina. And by the way, you get a lot of economic development out of that too. There's a lot of employment associated with building utility scale solar.
Well, thank you. We actually have a lot of great resources in South Carolina. The word's out apparently because a lot of folks are coming here.
Yeah.
Actually, I was in your direct testimony on page 2, something that caught my attention just out of curiosity, where you talk about your focus in recent years has been on performance-based regulation and energy regulatory policy, including integrated resource planning, clean energy, clean technology, smart grid, and climate issues. That really caught my attention. What your performance-based regulation and energy regulatory policy, performance-based. What do you mean by that? That caught my attention.
Well, I've written a number of papers and reports. Rather than send you to those, I'll just tell you what I mean by performance-based regulation is that the utility's performance has a lot to do with their compensation. That you move away from what is often called cost plus regulation to a different style. And I want to offer, I'm not going to suggest that Hawaii is anything like South Carolina. Maybe your beaches are better, who knows? But Hawaii just adopted a system where they're getting away from rate base as the way rates are set. So the utility no longer has what I identified as a CapEx bias. When your rates are given to you as a bundle of expenses that you incurred and a return on your rate base, building rate base becomes a goal in itself. If you pull that out and you give utility customers rates I don't want to necessarily get into all the detail here, but you give the utility a trajectory of rates for the next 5 years, say, and have them live with that. If they over earn, fine. If they under earn somewhat, fine. And you will have a utility which is much more motivated to seek out least cost solutions. And those may not be adding to rate base. Utilities have choices in how they plan a system and even how they operate a system. And you will hear a lot these days about things like non-wires alternatives, ways of treating distribution, congestion with devices that are not simply reinforcing the substations or reinforcing the feeder lines. Those kind of solutions are not easily found or embraced when you're under a rate-based rate of return regulation. So anyway, regulatory reform means that. And then also, I should say, instead of not only changing the method, I would suggest moving to something called revenue cap regulation. That's the official industry name for it. But also giving rewards or penalties to utilities depending on their performance. As a former consumer advocate, you might be surprised to hear me say that I don't really care if they go past their rate of return, their authorized rate of return, if customers are getting something back for it. And that's the whole notion of performance-based regulation, to tie the utility's performance to what the bills that customers pay.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing, and I understand what you're saying now, is more like an alternative rate methodology that's rather than based on rate base or whatever, it's based on performance standards, performance measures.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And also usually an index, so that rates go up by an index, which brings in inflation and trends in the industry, things like that. Commissioner, if I may point you to that paper that was attached as an exhibit, the risk-aware regulation. There's a discussion in there about alternative forms of regulation. I was writing about this in 2012 and 2014. Still working on it.
I understand. You never get there, do you?
No, I don't think. Maybe. I'm running out of rope, though.
On page 19 of your direct testimony, you mentioned cost of procuring solar, and you talked about it extensively. And storage resources becoming more cost effective, particularly with the passage of the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. And particularly with the passage of the Federal Inflation Reduction Act now, how does that help it? How does this act?
How does it affect this? Yeah. Well, there's several things. I won't get into all the tax.
Just hit the high ones, the big ones.
Yeah. One is that storage used to receive a production tax credit only if it was paired with solar. So storage had to be on the same site as the solar farm in order to get the tax credit. That's been relieved, and now you can have independent storage charged by renewable resources, and it gets the 30% ITC investment tax credit. They've extended a number of the tax credits involving renewable energy. That's another big factor in it. There's a huge loan guarantee program that will offer loans to qualified projects at essentially at the same rate as treasury bills or bonds. And that's kind of a sleeper provision. It's been identified in the literature as kind of a sleeping giant, but that's another possibility. There's items in there for fossil fuels too. I don't mean to suggest there's none, but the thrust of it really is towards resources which do not emit carbon dioxide. There's other fixes or changes with how the investment tax credit is calculated. There's the possibility of getting it directly instead of having, the utilities won't have to go through an entity with a tax appetite in order to avail themselves of the tax credit. It'll be what's called direct pay. So those are I guess the major things that will affect PURPA-related expenses in South Carolina.
So pretty much through tax credits, and I don't know if that would necessarily, well, subsidy tax credits and changing how some of those tax credits can be used now and such.
That's right.
You know, I can't remember if I heard it in the hearing now or some course or class somewhere, but they were talking about such as this. And would you say that this implies that government policies can have an effect on the cost of energy sources? Is that a fair statement?
Sure. That's always been true, but yes.
And this is where I was trying to remember if it was another hearing or where it was. I just don't recall. But it was stated that if there was a similar effort maybe to subsidize or tax incentives or whatever relative to coal, gas, or whatever, what effect would that have? Do you think something like that could have an effect that would have some positive effect on, I don't know, the customer or use or whatever?
Well, Commissioner, the U.S. and to some extent this commission and your colleagues to the north of you, you're pursuing a couple of goals right now. Least cost, reliability constrained energy is one of them, but energy which doesn't pollute as much. You were questioning earlier about the way of removing particulate matter and gases from the stack. Those requirements are going to keep getting tightened down, I'm convinced. And the bill, as modified to some extent by Senator Manchin, has got provisions in it that will potentially aid carbon capture and sequestration. Nobody knows if that's going to be economic, but they're going to try and figure that out. There are provisions in there which change the review of natural gas pipelines, which may speed some of them up if they can otherwise meet environmental requirements. So yeah, I won't say that bill is balanced with, it's not, it does definitely push in the direction of clean energy resources, renewables and energy efficiency and other things. But in order to pass, it got somewhat more balanced than that. I should also mention, I mean, I don't want to drag this out too far, too long, but some industries, including the nuclear industry, get substantial subsidies now in terms of insurance, and gas production gets the depletion allowance, which really helps make those wells pencil out. So there are other types of, I'll call them subsidies, but it's really, as you said, government policy in action.
I guess as I think about all the different energy sources, and I suspect, as a commissioner, you dealt with very similar things, but do you agree that it is wise and reasonable, I guess, to have a diversified portfolio of generation? It is better to have a diverse, well, let me ask the question. Is it better to have a diverse portfolio of energy sources, generation, than all your eggs in one basket or two baskets?
I think, Commissioner, you're really evoking portfolio theory, right? In financial markets, diversification is considered to be the best strategy for those. And in general, if you can learn what the risk-adjusted cost of the resources is, yes, I think so. Right now, the Duke portfolio looks like coal and gas. And there's not much diversity as between those two things. And what I'm suggesting, there's some hydro too. I shouldn't leave that out. But renewables have a long way to go before they're in the ballpark of what these other fuels are in the portfolio. So yes, I think your argument about diversity actually argues for more non-standard resources. Not that they don't work, not that they, I've been doing this a long time. I've heard all the stories about the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't always blow, but the utilities have figured that out. They figured out how to run a system with variable renewable resources on it. So that can be done. But I don't see Duke Carolinas or Duke Progress moving very strongly in that direction. That's all. And I agree with you. I think a much more diverse portfolio would be a good idea.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Benz, and I do hope you can come visit us. And we're, I guess, at the tail end of hurricane season, so now's a good time.
I'll look you up if I come to town, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Other commissioners? Redirect.
No redirect. We'd ask that Mr. Benz be excused.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Benz, thank you for your testimony today. Appreciate you participating in today's hearing, and you are excused. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I can still listen if I want to, though, right?
Certainly. Ms. Mixon or Ms. Clancy, anything else?
Nothing more.
No, I will. Just one thing to add, Chair Belzer, because you did ask for us to check in with our clients on the stipulation. Say CCL and Upstate Forever do not object to the stipulation that was entered into. Though, again, to many of the points that are made in Mr. Benz's testimony, we think this is a way to mitigate the immediate rate impact to customers, but that the commission should evaluate longer term solutions to help mitigate the fuel cost risks to start with.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any response from the utility at this point? Thank you. Mr. Elliott, you're up. I tell you what, we've been going a while, hadn't we? I'm sorry. I kind of lose track of the time sometime. Why don't we take a 15-minute break, and that'll give everybody time to get Mr. O'Donnell on the line. Is that okay? We'll be back at what is it, 3:45. Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Service Commission as we continue in docket 2022-3-E, base rate fuel proceeding for Duke Energy Carolinas. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin, and present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. At this point, we are with Energy Users, South Carolina Energy Users Committee. Mr. Elliott, you're recognized.
Call to the witness stand Kevin O'Donnell.
Okay.
I understand Mr. O'Donnell is with us virtually.
It just takes a second to, there we go. Good afternoon, Mr. O'Donnell. How are you today?
I'm good. Good afternoon, everyone.
Mr. O'Donnell, I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand and let me administer the oath, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Elliott, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. O'Donnell, would you please state and spell your last name for the record, please?
It's Kevin O'Donnell, capital O, apostrophe, capital D-O-N-N-E-L-L.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. O'Donnell, by whom are you employed?
Nova Energy Consultants in Cary, North Carolina.
And what are your duties and responsibilities with Nova Energy Consultants?
We're a utility financial analysis firm that we do everything from wholesale power contracts to intervention, litigation support, and utility rate proceedings around the country.
Very fine, thank you. Did you prepare or cause to be prepared for pre-filing with this commission 9 pages of direct testimony in this docket?
Yes, I did.
Have you had an opportunity to review your testimony prior to your appearance here this afternoon?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any corrections, additions, or revisions to your pre-file testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you those same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I'd move Mr. O'Donnell's 9 pages of pre-file direct testimony into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. O'Donnell's direct pre-file testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. O'Donnell, did you append to your pre-file testimony your resume?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or additions to your resume?
No.
Madam Chair, I'd move the one appendix into the record as the next hearing exhibit, please.
Mr. O'Donnell's pre-filed exhibit, I think it's called Appendix A, will be marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 10 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. O'Donnell, have you prepared a summary of your testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please present it to the commission now?
Yes. In my pre-filed testimony before this commission, I described the cost impact of the current filing of Duke Energy Carolinas, DEC or company. Without a doubt, energy commodity prices have skyrocketed in the past year due to market supply imbalances. DEC's rate hike in this case would raise industrial rates by as much as 24.4%. Clearly, rate increases as much as 25% constitute rate shock to DEC consumers and should be phased in over time. My recommendation was that the undercollection be collected over a period of 3 years instead of collected in 1 year. Compensate DEC for the time value of money. I further recommend DEC be allowed to earn interest at the rate of the 3-year T-bond plus 65 basis points for any fuel cost uncollected. As the Commission is well aware, the entire United States has seen natural gas prices increase due to the incredibly strong demand for LNG exports required to keep natural gas flowing in Europe, which is struggling to deal with the decision of Russia to cut off natural gas flows to NATO members. However, those price increases due to the increase in LNG exports is not the only reason for the cost increase here in the Carolinas. Indeed, these cost increases have been greatly exacerbated here in the Carolinas due to the capacity shortages on Transco, which is the primary interstate gas pipeline to South Carolina and North Carolina. As an example of the severity faced in the Carolinas, natural gas is now trading for over $21 an MMBTU in the months of January and February 2023. when at the beginning of 2022, forecast called for natural gas to be $4 per MMBTU for the entire calendar year. I support the settlement and feel it is in the best interest of South Carolina consumers. Spreading the rate hike over a longer period will lessen the pain in the monthly power bills. This completes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Please answer any questions council or the commissioners may have for you.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Upstate Forever.
No questions.
Thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff,
No questions.
Duke Energy Carolinas.
No questions.
Commissioners. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Mr. O'Donnell, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
So you originally suggested 3 years to recover these costs over, and but now it's gone to 2 years. Do you see any pluses, minuses to switching from the 3 years to the 2 years?
Well, the plus is the obvious cut in rates, roughly 24.4% to 19.3%. You know, the negative is I can't necessarily disagree with the concerns that I've heard previously about what may happen next year. But if you look at the forward curves in natural gas, it looks like this is going to be a pretty rough winter. But once we get into the spring of next year, it looks like prices are going to come down, hopefully because of MVP being completed, maybe because more coal is in the market. But when you look at the pros and the cons of it, I think 2 years is definitely worthwhile.
Okay. And so my understanding of the interest rate is that it's the 3-year Treasury plus 65 basis points. And so what they're trading right now at about 3.5, 3.6, somewhere in that range.
Yes, sir. 3.545 to be exact.
Okay. So you add 65 basis points to that and you're coming up to somewhere like 4.2 or somewhere in that range.
Plus 4.1.
Okay. And you wouldn't happen to know, is that anywhere close to the average cost of long-term debt for Duke?
It's very close. I don't have the exact number of the DEC embedded cost of debt right now. It's going to vary over time. Say, replace some of the higher cost debt and issue new debt. I would think that Duke's overall cost of debt right now is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3.8%. So 4.1% is pretty close.
Okay. So they'd be coming out a little bit better than if they finance this themselves through long-term debt, which this is short-term anyway. But so you think overall this is fair to the customers and in the public interest?
Yes, sir. As an example, when y'all excuse me right here, I'm getting in my car and I'm driving down to Eastern North Carolina where I'm raising rates to a municipality 15% because of the exact same commodity cost increases that we are seeing here in this case. So it is a painful time for everybody. There are two primary reasons for it, but at the end of the day, I think this settlement is good for the consumers of South Carolina.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. That's all I had.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Caston.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Donnell.
Good afternoon.
The what Commissioner Thomas was asking you if you thought it was fair, and I was looking at your testimony too, where you recommended 3 years and 3-year treasury bond plus 65 basis points. And I could have missed it, but I just didn't see where it said why. You know, why? I mean, I can see treasury rates because that's just a good number to pick, I reckon, but why 65 basis points on top of that?
Precedents, this was what we determined back in 2014, I guess by give and take. I'll be honest, that was 8 years ago. My memory banks don't back that far, even though I was part of the case. But the same type of 3-year T-bill plus 65 basis points was what we had settled on in a 2014 case, and that we just brought it forward on this case.
Would you agree that it's okay not to do things the way we've always done it just because we've always done it that way?
Yes, sir, I would agree with that. But I do believe that the nature of what we're doing here is fair, both sides as well.
Understand. I was thinking about, there's probably some companies, manufacturers that use a lot of gas, traded on stock exchange. And I don't know when their fiscal years are, but I wonder how many of them budgeted for an increase like this.
Few, if any. We have had a conversation with our members, and this is going to be a very painful bite. There's no doubt about it. Few, if any, budgeted for it.
Well, my first thought was they don't have an option of a fuel rate adjustment, do they?
No, sir, they do not.
They just have to eat it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, no more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioners, any other questions? Hearing none. Mr. Elliott?
No redirect, Madam Chair. I ask that the witness be excused.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Mr. O'Donnell, thank you for your appearance and testimony today. You are excused.
Thank you.
Mr. Elliott, anything else?
Nothing further.
Thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, we'd like to call our first panel, Ms. Gretchen Poole and Mr. Anthony Brazino.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Ms. Poole, ladies first, so we'll start with you. Could you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, it's Gretchen C. Poole.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as a senior regulatory analyst for energy efficiency and renewables.
Ms. Poole, in connection with this proceeding, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 8 pages of direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any corrections, additions, or deletions to that testimony?
No.
If I were to ask you those same questions, would your answers be the same today?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Ms. Poole's direct testimony be entered into the record of this proceeding as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Poole's direct testimony will be entered into the record as if testified to from the stand.
Ms. Poole, did you also file one exhibit identified as Exhibit GCP-1 in connection with this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Do you have any corrections, additions, or deletions to that document?
No, I do not.
Okay. Madam Chair, I would ask that Ms. Poole's Exhibit GCP-1 be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Ms. Poole's pre-file direct exhibit GCP-1 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 11 and entered into the record of this proceeding.
Ms. Poole, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Could you provide that at this time, please?
Sure. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the Commission. It's my pleasure to appear before you this afternoon. ORS found the company's actual and estimated avoided and incremental DERP costs in this proceeding to be reasonable and accurately calculated. Their calculations complied with Act 236 and with this commission's orders and directives in previous DERP-related proceedings. ORS recommends that the commission accept the company's proposed updates to the NEM tariffs. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Poole. Mr. Brazino, could you state your name for the record, please?
My name is Anthony D. Brazino.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the Office of Regulatory Staff as an audit manager.
And Mr. Brazino, in connection with this proceeding, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 18 pages of direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any corrections, additions, or deletions to that testimony?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you those same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Brazino's direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Brazino's direct testimony will be entered into the record as if testified to from the stand.
Did you also file 9 exhibits identified as ADB 1 through 9 in connection with this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any corrections, additions, or deletions to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Brazino's exhibits ADB 1 through 9 be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Brazino's pre-filed exhibits accompanying his direct testimony and identified as exhibits ADB 1 through 9 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 12 and admitted into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Brazino, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Could you provide that at this time, please?
Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to explain the scope of ORS's examination of Duke Energy Carolina's books and records as they pertain to the company's operation of the fuel adjustment clause in the current filing and present the results of our examination. This examination included the review of base fuel, environmental, capacity, DERP incremental, and DERP avoided costs. ORS examined and verified the monthly over and under recovery balances as recorded by the company for the actual period that ended May 2022. ORS recalculated the balances of the estimated period that ended September 2022. My direct testimony also explains the 9 exhibits that I sponsor for this hearing, and this concludes my summary.
Thank you, Ms. Poole. Mr. Brazino, please answer any questions the other parties or the commissioners may have.
South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Say CCL Upstate Forever.
Just a few brief questions. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. Ms. Poole, Mr. Brazino, nice to see you both. Ms. Poole, I just have one brief question for you. Now, you've been watching this hearing all day today, have you?
Yes.
And did you hear earlier when Commissioner Caston asked Mr. Martin a few questions about the impact of the value of solar on the overall DER incentive?
Yes.
And
Ms.
isn't it-
Poole, may I get you to speak into that microphone,
Yes,
please?
Sorry.
And isn't it true that as the value of solar increases, the DER incentive that's recovered by the company from other customers decreases?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Brazino, just a few questions for you. Now, so your testimony summarizes the full extent of ORS's review in this docket, is that correct?
It summarizes the extent of the over and under recovery balances that I sponsor for my side of the review. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but it touches on nuclear over recovery, fuel costs, and each separate component. Is
Yes,
that right?
ma'am.
And so ORS's review, your review, involved examining the books and records of the company's operation, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you verified the mathematical accuracy of the over and under recovery balances of the company's fuel costs, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And now ORS hasn't opposed any aspect of the company's application, including the 13.2% rate increase for residential customers. Is that right?
Correct.
And now you testified in the 2 prior fuel dockets this year, first for Dominion and then for Duke Progress. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And as is the case here, each utility in those dockets was proposing a rate increase that was driven by increasing gas prices. Is that correct?
There was other costs that increased as well, but by large, natural gas was the primary driver. Yes,
Was the
ma'am.
primary driver. And the increase proposed in this proceeding is thus the third rate increase that has been proposed in fuel proceedings so far this year, correct?
Considering that there's only 3 in the year, and yeah.
Well, there's another one coming later this fall, isn't there? Dominion's second fuel proceeding.
That's an atypical proceeding, but typically there's only 3 a year.
So we'll say so far this year because it's an atypical year. How about that?
Yes, ma'am.
So now the 13.2% increase that was initially proposed in this proceeding is also the largest that's been proposed so far this year. Isn't that right?
As actually verified and reviewed by ORS, yes.
Okay. And now, given the series of unprecedented increases in fuel proceedings this year, has ORS considered whether the company's fuel mix as is presents unacceptable risks to customers?
With due respect, ma'am, I think that belongs in an IRP-related proceeding and not in a fuel proceeding regarding cost recovery of expenses that have been incurred.
And under the South Carolina fuel statute, utilities are required to take every reasonable step to minimize fuel costs for its customers, giving due regard to economical generation mix and total cost of service. Isn't that right?
That would be my understanding, yes, ma'am.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Ms. Clancy. Duke Energy Carolinas.
No questions.
Commissioners. Commissioner Carol Lee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good to see you all this afternoon, and glad that it's Monday afternoon when we're doing this. Mr. Brazino, I feel like this is kind of a deja vu, but in your Exhibit 5, there is a month where they're negative cost. And I feel like it's something I may have asked about or someone's asked about before, but would you explain how that's possible in March of 2022?
1 second.
I can understand.
Okay, so you are looking at the Exhibit 5 for the environmental costs?
Right. Magnesium hydroxide, calcium carbonate, and other sorbents.
Right. So that column, those 2 months in particular, there is a quarterly entry that is performed to true up the inventory of the Blues Creek facility. So in that entry, the removal of the prior quarter's amount resulted in a cost that was exceeding the incurred cost for that current month, which resulted in the negative dollar amount shown there.
Is that a regular occurrence on an annual basis?
Yes, this company does this kind of quarterly basis for this facility.
So I could be remembering this from last year as a possibility.
If we discussed it last year, then yes, ma'am.
Maybe. I don't remember, but thank you very much. And Ms. Poole, on page 4 of your testimony, you talk about cost above avoided cost. What are you referring to when you talk about a DERP and incremental cost?
So anything that's can you hear me? I'm sorry. Anything, you said page 4, right?
Right.
So anything that's over the avoided cost would go into that incremental bucket.
And what would that include?
It would include your, let's see. I'm trying to find where you were asking me. Is it the top of the page? Can you tell me a line number so I can read the context?
I'll tell you what, I'm going to scan this while I ask you something else and listen to you. And this one's an easier one for me to ask and probably for you to answer. It relates to a question I asked earlier about the 1,000 kilowatts per month. Is that an industry standard that you're aware of?
It's one I'm familiar with. Before I was employed by ORS, I actually worked at SC DN or Dominion, and that was pretty standard when I worked there. So it's something that I've been familiar with for years. Yes.
And is that evaluated in terms of whether
Can you
that's
wait
relevant?
just a second? I don't think we're able to hear you, Ms. Poole, for some reason. Can you test that for me?
Yes, ma'am.
There you go. You're gonna have to get right on that
Okay.
microphone. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if it's something, I don't know if that's a company standard. I know it's an industry standard. I don't know if it's something the companies evaluate periodically or if it's just something that's been accepted and nobody's challenged.
Okay. I'll be curious and ask the question again in the future. If it seems like there's a lot that has changed over time in terms of whether it's energy efficiency or whether it's the number of devices that we have plugged in.
Constantly changing. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
So I'll be curious for an update at some point. Well, I figured that was quick. I tell you what, I'll come back to it if there and find it specifically on this page and let somebody else have a chance.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Commissioners? Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure who I'll just ask the question. Maybe the accountant was. The carried interest, the treasury rate plus 65 basis points. Who pays for that?
The interest that would be accumulating on the deferred amount, the customers would.
So RS okay with, we did it, and whenever said we did it 2014, 2015, paying treasury rate plus more. Is this this is okay with ORS?
My understanding of the 2014 case was that it was ultimately a settlement agreement that resulted in that. In this particular case, as spoke to by our lawyer, Mr. Mushkin, ORS is not objecting to what has been stipulated between the SCEUC intervener and the company.
Not objecting sounds like I'm not going to hug you real strong on this one, but I don't want to read too much into that. So, and you're an accountant, so you're not an attorney, but just because we did it in 2014, does that mean we're supposed to do it in 2022?
I can't make that determination for you, Sarah. That is, with respect, y'all's decision to make on the end of the day. I can tell you that, to my recollection, the 65 basis points has been a standard that has been used by this commission for a number of years, recognizing that it isn't necessarily you and y'all that are sitting there in the seat right now, but the commission here has historically used 3-year plus treasury plus 65 basis points.
You have any idea where it came from?
I do not, sir.
You ever heard the story about Grandma's pot roast pan?
Probably have.
And I won't tell it. No more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Ms. Poole, it is page 4, and it is line 4 to 5, where you talk about cost related to the shared solar program, cost above the avoided cost.
Mm-hmm. So that's just anything that the company can avoid goes into that avoided cost bucket. Anything additional goes into an incremental cost bucket. And that is basically what would go in that incremental cost bucket.
And do you have examples?
I do not, no ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Commissioners, anything further for this panel?
Madam Vice Chair.
Vice Chair Powers.
And I'll let either one of you grab at it. Following up on what Commissioner Caston asked about the carrying cost, I guess is another way to put it. is there really an actual cost to that for the company?
I mean, they technically would incur either debt or shareholder money that they would have to expend upfront until they get recovery of customers. So technically, yes, there is some level of cost that they would be incurring.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioners, last call. Thank you. Mr. Mustian?
No redirect.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony today. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Rainey, you up?
Oris now calls its second panel, witness Omari Thompson and Mr. Brandon Bickley to the stand.
If you would please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Thompson, please state your full name for the record.
My name is Omari Rashad Thompson.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as a regulatory analyst.
Are you the same Omari R. Thompson who pre-filed 7 pages of direct testimony in this docket?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, corrections, or edits to that testimony today?
No, I do not.
If I ask you the same questions, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I move that Mr. Thompson's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Thompson's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Thompson, did you also pre-file 6 exhibits marked as ORT 1 through ORT 6 in this docket?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to those exhibits?
Yes, I do. On exhibit ORT-4, the very first column on the far right has a revised explanation for that outage. Catawba Unit 1.
Catawba Unit 1, and which, can you repeat that again? Which one?
The very first column on the far right.
Okay. And so what was the nature of the change that you made?
The explanation for the outage, slightly different.
Okay. So other than that, just a second. Can we,
Do you have corrected
copies of the revised exhibit?
a corrected exhibit?
Yes.
That's fine. If you give those out.
Other than that change to the explanation of outage, do you have any other changes, corrections, or edits to your exhibits?
No.
Madam Chair, I move that Mr. Thompson's pre-file exhibits ORT 1 through ORT 6, including the revision or correction to ORT 4, be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Thompson's pre-file direct exhibits ORT 1 through 6 with the revised exhibit ORT 4 will be marked as a composite exhibit, marked for identification as hearing exhibit 13, and entered into the record of this case. Do you need these? Have the parties received a copy of these exhibits? Okay.
Mr. Thompson, did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Please present it at this time.
Sure. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Belzer, and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to set forth ORS's recommendations resulting from its examination and review of Duke Energy Carolina's power plant operations used in the generation of electricity to meet the company's retail customer requirements during the review period. ORS examined various fuel and performance documents related to the company's electric generation and power plant outage and maintenance activities. ORS analyzed the company's monthly fuel reports, including power plant performance data, heat rate data, unit outages, and generation statistics. ORS also monitored electric generation statistics through industry and governmental publications and attended the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's 2021 annual assessment meetings for the Catawba, McGuire, and Oconee nuclear stations. Additionally, ORS met with company personnel to discuss and review the company's direct testimony, electric generation, power plant outages, maintenance activities, and a variety of other topics. ORS determined that the company made reasonable efforts to maximize unit availability and minimize fuel costs. ORS also found the company's plant outages to be reasonable based on ORS's review of the outage data from the actual period, forecasted outage data from docket number 2021-3-E, historical outage data from previous annual fuel proceedings, and industry experience. However, ORS determined the total number of plant outages experienced by DEC during the actual period is greater than previous annual fuel proceedings. Due to the higher frequency of outages, ORS will conduct an independent review to determine the primary drivers for the increase in generation plant outages. ORS also found the company's maintenance schedules and projected performance data for its power plants for the estimated and forecasted periods to be reasonable. This concludes my summary.
Mr. Bickley, please state your full name for the record.
My name is Brandon Sinclair Bickley.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the state of South Carolina as a regulatory manager in the Energy Operations Division for ORS.
Are you the same Brandon S. Bickley who pre-filed 13 pages of direct testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes, corrections, or edits to your direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you the same questions posed in your pre-filed testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I move that Mr. Bickley's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Bickley's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if testified to from the stand.
Mr. Bickley, did you also pre-file 5 exhibits with your direct testimony marked as BSB 1 through BSB 5?
Yes.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to those exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, I move that Mr. Bickley's exhibits, pre-file exhibits to his direct testimony, BSB 1 through BSB 5, be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Bickley's pre-filed exhibits that were attached to his direct testimony and denoted as BSB 1 through BSB 5 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 14 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you. Mr. Bickley, did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Please present it at this time.
Certainly. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. My testimony sets forth ORS's findings and recommendations resulting from our examination of Duke Energy Carolina's fuel expenses used in the generation of electricity to meet its South Carolina retail customer requirements. ORS examined various fuel-related documents that address the company's fuel, environmental, and purchase power expenses for the actual, estimated, and forecasted periods. ORS analyzed the company's monthly fuel reports and examined the company's contracts for nuclear fuel, coal, natural gas, fuel oil, transportation, environmental reagents, purchase power, and the changes related to fuel contracts. ORS also evaluated the company's policies and procedures for fuel procurement, transportation, and any changes related to its policies and procedures. ORS examined the company's records for incurred fines, penalties, or late fees that may negatively impact customers, and ORS did not find any instances of fines, penalties, or late fees during the actual period. Additionally, ORS utilizes industry and governmental publications to monitor current market conditions and trends for nuclear, coal, natural gas, transportation, and renewable industries. ORS also met virtually with company personnel from various departments as part of its review. ORS reviewed the company's projected sales and analyzed them with regards to the projections from its last fuel proceeding and the actual sales from the actual period. ORS found the company's sales projections to be reasonable. ORS reviewed the company's forecasted costs for nuclear fuel, coal, natural gas, fuel oil, transportation, environmental reagents, and purchase power for the estimated and forecasted periods. ORS compared the monthly projected costs to historical projections, actual data, and commodity prices from numerous industry publications. ORS found the company's forecasted costs to be reasonable. Should the Commission approve the rates as proposed by the company, the average monthly bill for a residential customer on rate RS using 1,000 kilowatt hours would increase from $119.32 to approximately $135.08, a net increase of $15.76 or 13.2%. For general service, industrial, and lighting customers, the proposed rates would increase the average monthly bills by approximately 18.3%, 24.4%, and 7.2% respectively. The company's request for an increase is driven by numerous factors, one of which is the projected fuel cost under recovery that has resulted from increasing natural gas prices. The forecasted period drivers are the increasing commodity prices of coal and natural gas, and it is also impacted by cost increases for market power purchase driven by rising coal and natural gas prices. Both the natural gas and coal markets continue to see price volatility, and ORS will continue to closely monitor both. As discussed in my testimony, ORS recommends that DEC provides quarterly forecasts to all interested parties and update reports regarding the Mountain Valley Pipeline Project and any other pipeline projects. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Bickley. Please answer questions from the parties and the commissioners.
Thank you, Ms. Rainey. South Carolina Energy Users Committee. Say CCL Upstate Forever.
No questions.
Duke Energy Carolinas.
No questions.
Commissioners. I have a question. Mr. Bickley, you've recommended that the commission require Duke to provide updates on the Mountain Valley Pipeline and any other pipeline projects. Are you aware of any other pipeline projects at this time?
Not at this time, Commissioner, but we did include that in case there were any that we were not aware of.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Thompson, you talked about in your testimony about evaluating these different times that there's been a failure with the company or an outage. How does that compare with any sort of national average or with other utility companies?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? What page of the testimony?
I want to say there's a chart where you talked about the different outages that occurred. Is that correct? Or was that in someone's earlier testimony?
Are you speaking of page 5 where I said we noticed there was an increase in outages?
Yes. How does that compare with other utilities? Or is it just a bad year or?
Well, I didn't necessarily review that as that wasn't a part of my review. I can tell you how it compared to past years of DEC as far as their outages.
That's good.
Okay. So for the coal units, we totaled the outages from this review period to be 32 outages. That number for last year was 25. The year before that, it was 19. For the nuclear units, we found the number of outages to be 12 total. Last year, that number was 7. And the year prior to that, it was 6. That's the major outages, the outages lasting greater than 7 days or 168 hours.
Would these outages have anything to do with the supply chain problems and other problems that we've dealt with in the last year, or is there any particular cause why the outages are all more this year than in the past?
As I noted in my testimony, we're going to be doing an independent review as far as to the drivers of those, the increase in the outages. We're going to be looking at it from an operation and maintenance perspective. Looking at the scope of maintenance per unit outage, whether there's capital projects or investments, things of that sort, things that will fall outside of the scope of the fuel proceeding or the fuel statute. But we did notice there was an increase, so we just wanted to, in the interest of transparency and full disclosure, we wanted to note that we would be looking at it in a review outside of this proceeding.
So that's something you'll be able to answer sometime in the future, not now.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carol Lee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Just following up on Vice Chair Powers' questions, when you noticed the outages and compared them to the past, were you able to have conversations with the company about that?
Yes, ma'am. We spoke directly to company personnel on multiple occasions about all the outages. We reviewed the outage reports. We read through the root cause analyses if there was any, and that's it.
And from this independent review, how will the Public Service Commission learn the results of that?
Of the outage reports or?
Your independent review that you're planning to do?
Well, it's in the preliminary stages right now, so I'd have to defer any questions about that to my colleague or as witness Bickley. He might be better able to address that.
Okay.
Commissioner, like Mr. Thompson said, hello. We're still in the early stages of that. We haven't established how we would facilitate sharing that information. Like I said, in full disclosure and transparency, we just wanted to note that in Mr. Thompson's testimony that we will be taking an outside look, something that is separate from the fuel proceeding.
Is it fair to say you'll evaluate, how you will share that with us?
Yes, we plan on doing that, Commissioner.
Okay. And to both of you, but I think to Mr. Bickley, how is reasonable defined? You reviewed and found the results, the proposal to be reasonable in terms of their monthly projections. Is reasonable defined in statute? Is reasonable defined in your operating procedures?
So I'll tell you, Commissioner, reasonable may not be specifically defined, but the review that ORS conducts is very extensive, very arduous. We, as Mr. Thompson noted, not only do we conduct the review ourselves, but we also have discussions with the company as well. That's a big part of the review. As we identify questions, as we identify concerns, through looking at the monthly reports, the fuel documents, through tracking the various publications that we utilize to monitor the market, as well as looking at their policies, their procedures, their programs. Once we've done our independent review, and just for clarity as well, it's not like Mr. Thompson and I are sitting in a little box by ourselves. We have a whole team. We have folks from our audit department, our EE renewables department, our energy operations group. And it's not just the two of us sitting there from our group. We have other folks in our group with extensive backgrounds and knowledge and experience that all weigh in on this review. And after we have done an extensive review, we will sit down with the company multiple times. Matter of fact, during this particular fuel proceeding, we had numerous discussions with the company on a variety of topics. It wasn't just one meeting, it was multiple. So after our review and also in looking at how past fuel proceedings, what data occurred during the last DEC fuel proceeding, sometimes comparing it to other utilities if the situation is applicable. If something is not right, if something we find an error, if we find something that is incorrect, then we'll dive deeper. But as our testimonies note, we do not offer any changes to the company's recommendations as we did not find anything unreasonable. I hope that answers your question, Commissioner.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Commissioners, anything further? Ms. Rainey, any redirect?
No redirect.
Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony today. Appreciate your participation being here, and you may be excused.
Thank you.
Anything else from the Office of Regulatory Staff?
That concludes ORS's case.
Duke Energy Carolinas, anything else?
Nothing further, Chair Belzer.
Anybody else? Any party? Thank y'all for being here. I don't know that y'all have had a chance to discuss proposed orders with Mr. Stark, but I would ask that you take a couple of minutes after the hearing and maybe confer with him on when proposed orders might be due. And you got the court reporter here. He can tell you when the transcript might be ready. Thank you all for your presentations today. It's always a pleasure having y'all in the hearing room. So if there's nothing further to come before the commission this afternoon, we'll adjourn this proceeding, and thank y'all very much.